Welcome, everyone, and buongiorno to Matt Hunsberger over in Paris. This is Talent Experience Live, the show that covers everything that you need to know in talent acquisition, recruiting, HR, artificial intelligence as it pertains to HR, and so much more. So be sure to always tune in every single Thursday at noon Eastern time here on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Facebook. I am your host, Devin Foster, and Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right work. It is the reason why we put on great programs like this, like Smarter with Jess Elmquist, our CHRO, why we write all of the fantastic blogs, and why we build the technology that we do, which, of course, is our Intelligent Talent Experience platform. It helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current roles and beyond, recruiters achieve next level productivity and efficiency, as well as managers get better data from the teams that they have, better analytics, better insights, and of course, better automation. All of this is powered by super slick artificial intelligence and machine learning. So head on over to phenom.com to learn more and experience Phenom for yourself. Today, I mentioned we are talking a little bit about artificial intelligence. There has been new news that has come out. It seems like every day there is new news around artificial intelligence, but the White House has now entered the chat. President Biden's landmark executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AR. How does this affect human resources as a whole? We've seen some local laws and rules that have been put in place in places like New York and California, but this is an executive order that is going to federally affect all of us. So today I'm chatting with Cliff, the artist known as simply at Cliff on Slack, our VP of Global Strategy here at Phenom. He's going to share his knowledge. He is, hopping on a bunch of different news outlets and things like that, sharing his viewpoint and our viewpoint from Phenom. So who better to hear about this new executive order than the man himself? So without any further hesitation, let's bring Cliff onto the program. Cliff, how are you today?
I'm doing good. We need to talk about that old photo.
we can swap. There are AI tools that we never again. I'm removing the photo from our Google Drive. We'll get you a new one. And we can even put a crazy afro on you if you want, some chains. The AI tools are fantastic. Now, I was messing around with some face swaps the other day. If you want to be on the cover of some movie poster, Cliff, I can make it happen. So we will update it for you.
Let's do it.
But anywho, we're talking about AI today, and the executive order has been pushed out, and it's really to address the legislation federally. What specifically does this outline for organizations as a whole, and why is it different than some of the state approaches that we've seen already take place?
Well, I think what's important for our audience to know about Biden's executive order, this White House executive order, is first, and you said it is really geared towards federal agencies, as well as if you work with the federal government, it will apply to you as a business or as an entity. It is voluntary, or they are making recommendations for the private enterprise. And this is going to be true for, practically speaking, any executive order that comes from our chief executive officer, our president, regardless who sits in that chair. But what it does signal is a more serious approach to addressing what is becoming a very big concern, both in the government sector as well as the private sector, which is how are we monitoring, regulating, defending, and explaining artificial intelligence and its use across a multitude of agencies, and by that, and sort of by association in the private sector, different verticals of business because of the net effect of working with these government agencies. So while it's unenforceable in the private sector, it'll be very enforceable at the federal level. And I think what we need to now be looking at is this, at least for this particular administration, because every administration is going to have their own view of things. But for this particular administration, this is their view on how to potentially write legislation, going to Congress and going to the House and going to the Senate and saying, here's a framework. And it differs significantly compared to what you were talking about at a state or local level. And we can talk about that. It also differs greatly. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about how it differs from EU AI, which again is not passed law yet in the European Union, but will be in the next month or so. There are very significant differences in how the European Union has looked at regulating AI and how at least this executive order aims to regulate artificial intelligence. So it is nuanced, and we can get into how maybe it differs from New York Local Law 144, the upcoming proposed legislation in California's AI Bill of Rights as well. There are significant differences.
Yeah, well, let's start up top. Let's start from a funnel perspective. How does it differ from what's happening in the EU? And is it going to affect competition in any way, shape, or form? And then we'll work our way down to the local level.
Yeah, so I depending on who's listening and watching this, I think, folks may not think about it this way, but this is important about in terms of how legislation gets written and who's influencing the legislation. So, there are very, very large corporations that have been involved in talks with the White House, with our Congress, as well as influencing the European Union's AI regulation. So what you should know about the EU AI is it's a risk-based framework. So it looks at AI at 4 levels of risk, 1 through 4, 4 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. 1 is something like artificial intelligence in gaming. Who cares? You're going to play a game. It doesn't matter if something's generated by AI. There's a contract you have as a gamer. You know that potentially that this is completely made up and not real. And maybe your data, your behavior, gaming behavior is being used, to teach the algorithms how to create something that, to be honest with you, might be slightly more addictive from a gaming perspective, right? That's obviously the whole point. But then you get to the risk level 4, which is, and we can use, something that might be a state-sponsored agency, and I don't want to name it because it's not really relevant, but a state-sponsored agency that has published software that's used in social media framework. You can draw your conclusion on that. They get access to your personal data, and in the European Union, the EU AI law is going to state basically that's banned. So there are some platforms that are at risk of literally being cut off of the European Union audience. HR sits at risk level 3. Okay. And what the EU AI specifically states, and this is text that was passed on June 16th of this year. So the way that the European Union creates law is they first agree on the language of the law, and then they agree on how it will be monitored and any regulatory framework that has to go around compliance. So they're working on that piece right now, and that's the piece that it will be passed at that point. But the text of the law, the language of the law, is agreed upon. So that's not going to change.
Okay.
What I'm telling you is net effect. The EU AI law is this risk-based framework, but for the HR component, it really looks at, are you using biometrics? Are you using demographic information? Are there discriminatory practices? Have you audited your HR practices for where and how artificial intelligence is being used? So this is the framework. What is the risk level that they're looking at? What's interesting about most European laws especially around technology, because GDPR is very similar, is it really does put a focus on the consumer controlling their experience and their data. And you will see that continue with EU AI. The issue with EU AI is that it will influence other laws around the world, very much like GDPR has as well. And this is where, the I'll be a little bit controversial here and talk about big business, especially big business that has a significant presence in the United States in particular, has been influencing the passage of EU AI as quickly as possible and has been working very hard to not move on AI legislation in the United States, simply because it gives them a significant advantage as US-based companies or companies that have a significant presence in the United States and might do some business in Europe. They're looking at shutting out European operators of artificial intelligence software, because if you are a software company in the EU, you are automatically bound by EU AI, and it's a regulatory framework that some could see as being prohibitive to scaling and growing and innovation and all of these things. And if there are no laws in the United States, or very few, or very light regulation, obviously, if you own a very big software company based in the United States, you're going to have a very big competitive edge because you're not bound by the same rules of the game as they are in the EU. So this is the challenge, right? And this is the reason that our primary reason that our own Congress has really failed to act on EU AI, or I'm sorry, about artificial intelligence legislation, is because, number one, it is complex, and number two, there's a lot of corporate influence in politics here, and so we've seen these same corporations pouring time, money, and effort and influence into EU AI to get that passed, while creating a resistance on this side. This is what's different about Biden's executive order, this White House's executive order, is it squashes all of that. And it says government has to act. And what is impressive to me personally is how comprehensive this executive order is. It's not a single page order. It covers like nearly everything I would want to see in terms of if something were to become law and we were regulating and putting the human in the best interest of artificial intelligence, not the other way around. The executive order really focuses on that. And that's the most impressive thing. And I'm not so sure right now how that's going to play out legislatively, but this White House has thrown the gauntlet down and has said, there is a failure to act, so we're going to act. And frankly, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. You're a human being. AI has the opportunity to discriminate against all of us in really meaningful ways. It also has the opportunity to benefit us in meaningful ways. We need to regulate that behavior and keep humans at the center of the benefit of AI, not the other way around. Because, Sam Altman has already come out and said, Sam Altman being the CEO of OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT and now DALL-E 2 and 3, image creators, has already said, and you can take it for what it's worth. I take him for his word, which is he wants AI to essentially replace the median or average adult human being in the workplace, which means he's kind of sided with the technology versus maybe with humanity. That's my own opinion, but you could derive from what he's saying is that when you use the word replace the median human being, I don't think it's a far stretch to say that we need regulation to ensure that doesn't happen.
Absolutely, and we've seen it, right, with the strike out in Los Angeles with the writers, right, where they are specifically, obviously there's other things at stake here, but one of the main talking points is protecting writers and actors and actresses against the use of AI and replacing some of those individuals. The question that I want to ask you, because you mentioned GDPR there, and we've seen maybe not carbon copies of it here in the United States, but there have been from a state and local level litigations that have been put into place, or laws that have been put into place to protect the privacy of individuals. I know California is one of those states. Do we anticipate with the passing of EU AI, certain local jurisdictions to follow in that same footstep and try and institute similar local laws around it?
Yeah, boy, I hope not. And the reason why is because it will be impossible to operate a multi-state sort of US national business if you wind up with 50 different sets of AI laws. And that, New York local law, I think it, again, it was born out of a lack of any federal guidance on AI legislation, and I think inherently it is trying to do something good, which is, again, keeping human beings at the center, making sure AI is explainable, that you can opt out of that process if you choose to, and you have control of your data, which I think is important to all of us.
Yes.
However, let me give you a difference between New York Local Law 144 and California AI Bill of Rights. And it's a nuanced difference. But what we're talking about here is automated employment decision-making tools. So this is the new acronym, AEDTs, is the new acronym to describe artificial intelligence making a decision in place of a human being. Now, I don't know any tool out there, I'm not saying that there aren't, but I don't know any tool in HR today that is saying, based on information, you have to hire Cliff over Devin, right? It might come up and say Cliff is a better fit in these areas, has better skills, more experience. Devin might be a good fit for these other reasons. Human being, go figure out, what you want. So maybe, like on the Phenom platform, we have something called Fit Score. And that fit score is explicitly used to determine whether an individual is a good fit to be recommended for an interview or not. That's it. It's basically saying between Cliff and Devin, go interview Devin because, he meets more of the qualifications that you're talking about, and while I'm not recommending Cliff be interviewed, here are the good attributes from Cliff, and you can maybe, interview him as well, but not recommending it. So it's up to the human being to decide. An AEDT, automated employment decision-making tool, defined under New York's local law 144, there are 3 criteria. The one criteria, it's sort of the third criteria, says this explicitly, that it is the only tool being used to make a decision. Now, again, I don't know any, and I've talked to, Commissioner Keith Sonderling about this. He's from the EEOC. And what we've talked about was, and his words, not mine, it's easy to get out of that because you just don't make that your decision-making tool, right? It's a recommendation engine. It's part of a process of things. But here's where the California law is going to differ if passed under current language. And that is in doubt right now. Their law, the California AI Bill of Rights, states as part of a decision-making process. So in that definition, any tool that makes a recommendation as part of a decision-making process would be considered an AEDT and be subject to the laws. Now, the good news for all of our clients or anyone that's thinking about doing business with Phenom, we already operate under the assumption that we're going to be an AEDT. And so we have audit tools and all these different things in the system that will comply with future laws, right? So, and obviously current laws. So if you want to audit under New York Local Law 144, we can do that, no problem. You want to audit under OFCCP, no big deal, that those things are built in. So we, and I think there are other companies that are going to take this stance too. We're not alone. We're not the smartest people in the room with come. There's lots of smart lawyers out there. Just operate as if you're going to be bound by these laws, because number one, ethically, it's the right thing to do. And second, you are going to future-proof your technology. It will be already ready for what these new laws are going to change. So, the challenge with local laws is they are going to serve local interests. And what a lot of these laws don't consider, when we think about CCPA, which is the variant of GDPR that California put in place around data privacy, and even GDPR itself, it never made any consideration for recruiting. And this is the challenge. Great for products and services. I don't want to be bugged and nagged all day long with my data being used to sell me products that I'm not interested in. And how'd you get my data? Like, I don't want to go on a website, and see my data being used for advertising on another website that I was just on that I didn't give permission to share. Like, that's what those laws are really designed to do. And that's a great use case. But it is becoming a blocker in recruiting because people are making the assumption that their data is being taken and sold to other companies for nefarious purposes or even marketing purposes, like third-party cookies, for example, which we don't use. And that data is being used in those nefarious ways, which is just not true. But how do you get a job, search for one online, be connected to meaningful work without exposing some of your data? My resume, my CV, you have to. Otherwise, you will lock yourself out of getting an interview with somebody because I don't think, in my opinion, that there is any recruiter in the world right now that willingly sorts through 500 resumes over a weekend to set up 100 interviews the next week. Like, nobody's doing that. The scale of our work and the data that we need to analyze can only be done effectively with the help of artificial intelligence in many different ways. Hopefully, we are going to see a slowdown in the use of local laws, and this executive order will be used as, hey, we're going to follow that because that's the right framework. And as more recommendations come out from this White House's executive order, because part of it is doing more research, more analyzation, which is a good thing. That we will get a clearer picture of how the government at the federal level will analyze and create specific law with specific use cases on how to use AI in ethical and responsible ways. And we need that because otherwise, I mean, could you imagine, if the civil rights laws were determined at the state level? Like, you would get just culturally, you would, and this isn't even something that's a bad thing, but culturally, some states are culturally different than others, and the laws would be vastly different. You, as a business, you would not be able to operate across state lines effectively.
Well, I think about, early on and when the country was founded, simply money, where states had different currency, and operating a business at that time where you'd have to, exchange things. It's one of the reasons why we went to the US dollar as a whole, where different, obviously, but we're talking about the same thing where if you're, especially with remote work now, Cliff, when we're talking about that, where you may have employees who are based in separate states. You may be on the border. We here in just outside of Philadelphia have employees who are from New Jersey who commute on a regular basis and things like that. It opens up a huge can of worms. But I think one of the main topics that you're referring to, and I do see the comment that comes through. I want to get to that in a second. But why don't we jump right into the comment? Actually, I think what this individual is talking about is the slippery slope, using some of these tools specifically from the military perspective, where someone is transitioning to civilian life and artificial intelligence potentially misrepresenting or misinterpreting an individual's experience. Does any of the litigation today talk about this, and how are technology companies working to resolve this issue that I'm sure has happened for some individuals?
The answer is yes. And I'm going to take a positive spin on this because I think human beings are inherently really bad at being consistent in their determinations of analyzation of data. The difference between using a tool like this, does it have the potential? Any tool has the potential to be used, in a negative way. However, the big difference here is that there's an audit trail. There's an audit trail with these tools, and we have it in our platform. And that's what I was talking about before. If you get, a notice of audit from OFCCP in the future now, or even in the future, that's going to contain some type of, help us understand how you're using AI in the process and what recommendations are being made, based off of what data is being examined and used. Like, we can do that. We can actually show that today. So, I talked to, Commissioner Sonderling about this from the EEOC, and his take, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, but his take on this has been, we look favorably, his word, not mine. We look favorably on organizations that are using these tools because these tools can be audited. We can see all the data that's coming in. We can see who's making decisions, and we can see, does that align with, civil rights and regulation? If it's only a human being looking at paper resumes, you can't audit that, because all you have to do is say, Devin, in this case, let's say Devin was in the military, I didn't hire Devin simply because he didn't have the skills I needed. And I looked at his resume, and yes, we actually used a military translator, and I have the data that then says, he didn't meet the qualifications. But if I didn't use a military translator, it's just my opinion. And you cannot, unless you can prove discrimination, which you need more than one transaction to prove discrimination. And this is just a legal standard, right? You can't take someone to court if there isn't a pattern. I didn't hire anyone from the military ever. Well, that's a pattern, and you could probably argue that there's some discrimination going on, either unconscious or conscious bias that's happening. But outside of that, it would be impossible to prove without a history, a pattern or a history of behavior, in terms of a hiring practice, for example, or a promotion practice, for example, to say that. Artificial intelligence, these tools give us an audit trail. And that is something that I believe is going to be the difference between uncovering what I believe is mostly unconscious bias in people, in their practices, and maybe help train individuals to look at their own unconscious biases, because it is a real thing. I don't care who you are. Unconscious bias is a very, very real thing. And we can train ourselves to be more effective at using these tools and this data that we're given.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And this is off topic, Cliff, but I think it has to be said when we look at folks transitioning from the military into civilian life. It comes down to skills, which is where the industry is moving today, where it's less about job descriptions and things that individuals, their titles and things. It's looking at what skills does this individual provide, which AI and skills ontology is only going to assist with, right? If you have someone who is in a specific branch of the military in a specific role, you can understand that they have specific skills when it comes to problem solving, or working in, quite frankly, very difficult situations, high stress environments, things like that, where they are going to be looked at as apples to someone who may be coming from a traditional work background. And then you can bring the human into the loop and have an executive decision on who would be the best fit from those roles.
Yeah,
am I way off? Yeah,
because this is such a good point of why this technology is so necessary. And it's necessary, especially from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging perspective. And it's important that we talk about this, because AI tools like what we have built into our system, we actually have a military translator that understands the depth of skills and competencies of each skill and competency in a military position, and how it relates to the private sector. So we built our own military translator because there are a bunch out there. They're not very good. So we're like, we could do this better. But for any tool, regardless if it's military or civilian, private, or government, the average individual can typically identify somewhere between 15 and 20 skills and competencies on their resume or their CV. AI, on average, at least Phenom's AI, is finding somewhere between 40 and 60 skills and competencies. Now, you tell me, if you are someone looking for a job, and let's say that you are in an underrepresented community, you're a veteran, you might be ethnically diverse, you might be someone that is a person with a disability. Wouldn't you want a future employer to recognize more skills that you have than less? Because human beings, we are really, really bad at promoting ourselves. We do not fully understand our work patterns the way that artificial intelligence can and does. I would rather have more skills and competencies presented to an employer that are connected to their work than just my resume. And that's it levels the playing field, to your point, especially if you come from a protected class, because most protected classes, they have not been taught the same things that, classes that have had advantages, how to promote themselves, how to write a resume really effectively, right? And this is where artificial intelligence can come in and say, no, you actually possess more skills and competencies than you're giving yourself credit for. You're actually not just a good fit for this one job, but you're a good fit for 6 others. Wouldn't you want those options? And wouldn't the employer want the option to say, awesome, Devin, like, you're qualified for a lot of different work here. Let's talk about what you're really interested in, what you value. It changes the nature of the conversation. But we do need regulation around these tools to the commenter's point, to ensure that they are auditable, that they are defensible, and that we understand how and when they're being used in the decision-making process.
Yeah, no, that makes complete and total sense. And thank you to the commenter who chimed in. If you have any other questions, fire away. That's what we're here for. Cliff, I want to take a step back for a moment, because earlier on in the episode, you mentioned that there, as far as you know, is no end-to-end hiring solution that is completely automated, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. There has to be some sort of human in the loop. Does the executive order that was passed by Biden's White House, does that touch on human in the loop at all throughout this, and its necessity in, I think, that everyone can agree on?
There are several passages in the executive order that specifically call out the need to keep humans at the forefront of these technologies. And there are specific areas where we're talking about labor standards in the workplace. And you had mentioned, and I want to go back to something you talked about the SAG strike that's going on, about the settled workers or writers strike, and what will also be soon, the UAW is likely to settle very, very soon. The United Auto Workers, all 3 of these unions have said, and it was a point of contention around the impact of artificial intelligence on their work. And the executive order specifically calls this out and says, we need to look at and examine and analyze the impact of artificial intelligence on the workforce, and ensuring that people aren't being technified. I'll make that word up right now. Technified out of work, right? Not being replaced by technology, to the extent that folks like Sam Altman are maybe suggesting is their motivation. Again, my opinion on that. And so yeah, it does. It looks at that, because here's what worries the UAW, and it should worry the UAW. Tesla puts a car out around the world every 40 seconds. Tesla is building a car. And that's in part because the Tesla factory is a combination of both human and artificial intelligence working together to highly produce, their vehicles. The average Ford, Chrysler, GM product is being put out every 90 minutes. Now think about that. I could put a car out every 40 seconds, or I could put a car out every 90 minutes. In this world, who's going to win that race, that literal race to production? All day long, it's Tesla. But what the UAW is saying, and for those that don't know, they are non-union. They don't use union work. So they're not bound by these regulations and these laws. And this is why an executive order carries such weight. And while we want to use technology, to scale business and scale production, food production around the globe has greatly benefited from artificial intelligence. We can produce more food today than we ever have. Now, we still have a few food distribution problem that hopefully artificial intelligence will help us solve logistically, getting food to people. But in the United States, we toss 40% of everything that's produced. Like, our waste is through the roof, right? Yeah. And so when you look at these unions that are saying, we're concerned about artificial intelligence replacing a worker simply to produce something faster, is that good for humanity? And I just am in the process of writing an article about a role that's going to be created called and it's sort of created now, but it'll be more widespread, the AI ethicist, who is going to ask that question, who's going to say, yes, we can do it, but should we be doing it? What is this decision's impact having? And that's all these unions are asking for, is to say, you need to consider the human in this process. You can't just cut us out. everything can't be produced by artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence still can't, fix a pothole. It still can't build a house by itself. There are tools that we can use to do that. But do you really want to, call up a plumber and a robot shows up to your house? Like that's not that far-fetched anymore. It used to be, but it's not now. And it's scary when we think of the effect, especially on entry-level work, apprenticeship work, especially in the trades right now. Is we've done a really good job in this country of diminishing the importance of that work over the years. It's STEM. But now people are looking back at the trade work and saying, that can't be replaced by artificial intelligence right now. Somebody still needs to show up at my house and fix the broken pipe, or install the electrical outlet or do those things. So the trade work is becoming important. And what these unions are saying is we need to ensure that it stays important and not be replaced, be assisted by AI, but not be replaced. This executive order begins to address that.
Yeah. Now, obviously things are rapidly changing. You just said it there. No robot is showing up to our doorsteps right now. How has the executive order addressed the rapid pace of these technological advancements? Has it built in wording that says essentially for that type of role of the AI ethicist that you mentioned, because it is going to be a challenge if things get out of hand to put those worms back in the tube, right? It's always hard to go back and fix your mistakes previously. So has there been left room for improvement to talk about how fast these things are moving and potentially have rapid action towards them to avoid some of these issues you mentioned?
Yeah, let me give you a framework of this because I think this is important. When you get Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman and Sundar Pichai, like the CEO of Google, testifying in front of Congress, what they're saying is they've actually called out and said, "Go ahead and regulate us. We want it." They don't really want it. What they are counting on is that because government moves so slow that it's just going to take forever. In the meantime, they're just going to operate with the objectives that they feel are in the best interest of their shareholders. And so what this executive order really outlines is a few different things, which is number one, the talking about AI research and how we need to be sharing collectively of this research, because it's going to be better for humanity, better for the United States in particular. If we are sharing the research around AI, sharing test results, and understanding, the principles and purpose of any particular AI-based system, and it does demand that we promote open and fair use of competitive AI ecosystems. So it specifically is calling that out. Now, most businesses will say the second you start regulating anything that you are going to stifle competition. Well, it's just not true, right? If you look at, let's look at the previous example around the auto industry. Auto industry is a highly regulated industry. Some of the most stringent, regulations are in the automobile industry and in manufacturing. Has that stopped a company like Tesla from being built and producing cars? No. So there, I believe it's a little bit of a red herring. It's a little bit of the boy who cries wolf when big industry is saying you can't regulate us, it'll stifle innovation. Okay, maybe it stifles it for you, but there's plenty of small businesses out there like a Phenom, like the domain we're in, where there are 400 small companies like us that are building really innovative and cool solutions that will comply with these types of regulations. And you just need to talk to us, So, I think it's something that it depends on your perspective and it depends on your values and principles. A small company like Phenom, we value the experience that we're able to offer and build with our clients and deliver to candidates and recruiters, employees. And that's where our focus is. Other businesses are more focused on shareholder return. And so you need to decide who you want to do business with in that respect, because innovation is going to happen regardless of regulation.
Yeah. No, that makes a complete and total sense, and I appreciate you sharing that. The one to kind of put a bow on this, and the one thing that I want to comment on at the end is it sounds like as of right now, with the exception of EU AI, most of the legislation hasn't had a tremendous impact on the human resources industry, and I think the executive order outlines a few things as well, where you have to audit your AEDTs and things along those lines. But correct me if I'm wrong. The one saving grace I think for HR as a whole is its strictness of keeping things organized, right? For years, or companies have to have their fancy filing cabinets, their ATS systems, where there is a system of record for everything in place. I think we're starting to trend where folks maybe aren't leaning on ATS systems as much, and the importance now is that you work with organizations that are auditing themselves regularly, that are staying in line, that do recognize that they may be considered an AEDT and they have to operate as such. Am I way off there?
No, I think you're right on the mark, and I'm going to raise your statement to a much higher
Yeah.
level because I think now is the time. In my view, and where I see this going, I think the most important individual in this equation right now is the CHRO, CPO, VP of talent management, TA recruiting. Those executives are the most important people in this equation. And with respect to my friends that are CIOs and CTOs, this decision to first examine, analyze these technologies, and then potentially purchase something and then put it in place is really and I'll just say the CHRO. Everyone knows what I mean by that. In the people executives' hands, and it should be. Why? Because it's the first time in our history where these technologies have the potential to deeply impact human work. And that means that the folks that are in charge of the people experiences in the organizations become the most important people to make these technology decisions. I love my CIOs and CTOs. I would never say that there isn't value in the work that they do, but the reality is because they are disconnected from the human side of this work, and they're not responsible for human performance in an organization, it is the CHRO. It is the chief and executive people that should be making these decisions on how to analyze, purchase, and implement and use these technologies to scale, grow, and support a human inside of the work. Because if you leave it to technologists, they're tasked with a different set of responsibilities, which is to have the biggest return for your investors and shareholders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to mean, left to them, it's going to mean using tools that may replace people, and that's not something that we should all be encouraged by. So the people executives are the ones who have the best interest of human beings in the organization, and they should be making this decision.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the thing that works best for the bottom line may not be best for the people that are responsible for the bottom line, right? I think is what you're saying, Cliff. This has been, as always, a fantastic conversation. Any parting shots that you want to share with the audience at home before we hop off?
The only thing I'll say is I can be reached through LinkedIn. I'm LinkedIn, / Cliff J. And if you've got questions about these laws, if you've got questions about the executive order and its impact on your organization, this is my role as head of strategy at Phenom. I every day talk to clients about what this practically means to their business. I'm not a lawyer. I do not give legal advice, but what is the practical application of these regulations or suggested regulations, and future laws? Where is it going? How are we going to innovate? Just reach out to me through LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Thank you so much, Cliff. I appreciate it. I hope anyone who does have questions does reach out to you. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Devin.
Thank you. Bye. That was Cliff, and that was a fantastic episode about I mean, we covered it all. We covered EU AI. We covered the executive order. We talked a little bit about the state and local laws. We talked about, I think, some existential things as far as having, HR sort of ethicists in place, or AI ethicists in place, to make sure that what you're doing is not only beneficial for the business, but also beneficial for the people that work for that business. If you missed any of it at all, you can always catch the replay here on LinkedIn. You can catch it on YouTube, Facebook. The podcast will be out a little bit later today, so you can always listen to it on Spotify or Apple Music. I did have a clip, on some of the local laws and things like that, and what Phenom is doing from AI Day. But I had such a great conversation with Cliff. I don't think we need it today. So we will air that at a later date, I promise. If you have to see it and you can't wait to see it, you can always watch all of AI Day at phenom.com/AI Day. There's also a banner just at the top of phenom.com. But in the meantime, I hope everyone has a happy, a healthy, and a safe weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much.